All right, guys. It's March 15th, 2025. I am no longer counting the days since October 7th. I had considered counting the days since the ceasefire. I think we're around day 50, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 58 or something, but I'm back. I'm not going to be back every other day or every 3 days like I was, but I will. I expect that I will be back. And that's because after tonight, I think the war is back on or on its way to being back on. So here's my reasoning. By now, you've heard about the Americans bombing Sana'a, civilian areas in Sana'a, Trump saying, the Houthis have to stand down or else hell, there'll be hell to pay. The usual Truth Social message. But the reason that this is important now is because just like the previous year and a half, when Yemen took the actions that it did to initiate the Red Sea blockade, which they did in 2023, and the Americans began to bomb Yemen in reply on behalf of Israel, that was, I mean, we're in a hot war if that's what's happening. The Americans are bombing, the Ansarallah is imposing a blockade. Now, they want you to forget, the Americans want you to forget why Ansarallah imposed the blockade. But we don't forget. We know exactly why Ansarallah imposed the blockade. Ansarallah imposed the blockade because of the Israelis imposing their blockade on Gaza. So the Israelis, having agreed to a ceasefire some 60 days ago, a very detailed agreement, including an end to the war, including reconstruction, including stipulated amounts of material for rebuilding, stipulated amounts of aid and food. All of these things, guarantors, Egypt and Qatar, the promise to leave the Philadelphia corridor where they still occupy. All of these things, the Israelis have violated. And now the Americans are coming around and saying, demanding that Hamas accept revised versions of the agreement. And Hamas, just like they have all along, have said, we agree to what we've already agreed to, and we don't agree to what we have not already agreed to. So, just to reiterate the order of events, the Israelis invaded Gaza in 2023 in October. They were they accepted a ceasefire in November. They returned to the war after that ceasefire period expired and continued the war for more than a year until January 2025. Accepted a ceasefire, the contours of which have always been the same. Hamas's demands have always been the same, and the Israelis agreed to the ceasefire to stop the war, which they could not win, and temporarily, it seems, realized they could not win in Gaza. So I have always believed and always been saying in these Gaza sit reps that Israel's ground forces cannot defeat the ground forces of their opponents. They can't defeat the ground forces of Hamas in Gaza and the other resistance factions which fight alongside in the unified unity of fields system that they've developed. They cannot defeat Hezbollah. Their ground forces cannot defeat Hezbollah. And they're occupying Syria right now, and we don't know whether they can defeat HTS because that's sort of like saying one Israeli division can defeat another, or which unit of the Israeli military is better or worse, because HTS, the ruling party in Syria, and their military is, for all intents and purposes, from my perspective, a part of the Israeli military. And I know some don't like to hear that, and you are welcome to take your um, take your viewing pleasure elsewhere. I don't have any patience for anybody who is a supporter of the current Israeli, sorry, see, I mixed it up, Syrian regime. Um, I don't have time for you, and you don't have time for me. So I'll delete your comments. My channel is famous for deleting comments and deleting commenters. So please save me the work. I will say a few more words about Syria before this video is over. Let me just get back to this point. The Israelis cannot win on the ground, but the nature of this war is much more comprehensive than a battle between armies on the ground. The battle between armies on the ground is important. Indeed, it has been decisive, but Israel retains control over what goes in and out of Gaza. Israel retains control over the skies, and Israel and the Americans retain control over the Egyptian regime, over the Jordanian regime, over the Arab states that are supplying Israel today, over all the Western states. And as a result, having won the war on the ground, the people of Gaza, the Hamas, which is in charge in Gaza, does not have leverage to end the siege of Gaza or to stop the bombing of Gaza. And one point of leverage, which I always viewed as a very powerful point of leverage in terms of the siege, was the presence of Ansar Allah and their entry into this war back in 2023, and their ability to hit Israel with ballistic missiles, with drones, and their ability to shut down the Red Sea shipping lanes. They have shut down the Red Sea shipping lanes. The Americans have bombed them for it. And now they will. I don't think it's a matter of if they will. I think it's a matter of their entire record, their statements, their behavior, everything that they've done suggests they don't care, that they will retaliate for this retaliation. And that means the war is back on. And the war will probably come back on in Lebanon as the Israelis are pushing. Hezbollah is sticking to the ceasefire for now, but above a certain threshold, Hezbollah will also return to war. They are preparing for war again, and recognize that it's inevitable. The Israelis are taking parts of Syria unopposed. The Syrian regime has begun and is deep into committing a genocide on the coast of Syria against Alawites and other minorities, and that is what they were installed to do, and they're doing no more or less than what they were installed to do. And so where yeah, I guess let me make one last point about how we're back at war, because how did we get the ceasefire in the first place? And this is, I think, the hypothesis. The ceasefire was what baffled me, right? The war and the continuous escalation of the war didn't it can't I got used to that. I got used to, you remember, I used to begin all my videos by saying no end in sight. I got used to that. And so when the ceasefire happened, that was what was surprising. What was surprising was to see uh, Trump's people, specifically Witkoff, applying pressure on the Israelis to force them to a ceasefire. It was always clear to me, and I've said this even in this video multiple times, that the main issue pushed making the ceasefire happen was the exhaustion of the Israeli army. The Israeli ground force is exhausted. And that is something that I think it's possible to forget. I think Israeli society, Israeli politicians have already forgotten that. They're seeing their success in unopposed in Syria. They're seeing successes unopposed in Lebanon. They're seeing them able to do all kinds of horrific things in the West Bank. They're rearresting people that they've freed under the ceasefire. So these things facilitate them forgetting that they lost the war in Gaza and thinking that it was a mistake to accept the ceasefire and they could have fought on. This is one of these things that military people always say, where they say the military side was good. It's those politicians that stabbed us in the back. The military side actually wasn't good. And the politicians didn't stab anyone in the back. The politicians and the military and the society are all working in the same direction and the same genocidal, racist direction, rapist direction, I should say. You may have seen the United Nations Human Rights report on Israeli sexual violence. So the Israelis, that's what, for that reason, they didn't have any military success. There's no reason to think they would if they go back to war, but that isn't how they make decisions anymore. I think that is very clear now. The other thing that I think emerges from a study of the past 60 days is a struggle inside the American Israeli joint ruling class. So it's one of the phrases. I'm sure there's a better way of phrasing it within Zionism, within American Israeli Zionism. Witkoff came and said, you have to knock it off. They knocked it off for a little bit, but then this American faction that was working with Trump on forcing the Israelis to the ceasefire, I think has basically capitulated back to the Biden pattern of supporting genocide and backing the Israelis up militarily. So that's what I think the bombing of Yemen symbolizes. They also fired the guy who said Hamas don't have horns growing out of their heads. And he also said America is not Israel's agent. That was turned out to be unforgivable. And that probably is what got him fired, going on TV and saying America's not Israel's agent. That doesn't go back in the bottle. Everybody saw that. But and then they saw him get fired for it. All of the things going on campuses, the use of deportation, the deportation of this Columbia student, several now. There are several who are being deported now. One of them who's literally been disappeared. So I think what we're seeing, what my call right now, the way I see it, is a return to the pattern. These things are deeper than elections. These things are these factions, these elites and their agendas, the neocon agenda for the destruction of the Middle East, the destruction of all Middle Eastern rivals, possible independent national development in that part of the world must be destroyed. That is a historic agenda of the American elite, and that transcends Republican and Democrat. And so there was some kind of moment where Trump and the Republicans could visually distance themselves from the Democrats while also doing the Israeli army a solid and making it seem like they were forcing something on the Israelis, which the Israelis actually weren't able to sustain, which is the ground war. But they have not gone to the next phase of the ceasefire, and they're ramping up. They're tightening the siege. They're ramping up their aerial massacres, and now they're fighting with Ansar Allah in Yemen, and they're pushing Hezbollah to war, and they're threatening Iran. So all of these fronts, and the Syria situation has never been worse. There is an ongoing massacre. We're talking about thousands of people. I've seen estimates as high as 10,000 now. So all of the fronts that I had been reporting on over the since October 7th, 2023 are still active. Nothing has been closed. If we were in a situation now where we were in phase two and there were good negotiations going on about phase two, and the material that was promised to enter in phase one had entered, and the prisoner exchanges had been ongoing, I would be singing a different tune, and indeed, I may not even be back tonight. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is the tightening of the siege, the escalation of the bombings, Ansar Allah answering, and now war between the Americans and the Ansar Allah on Israel's behalf, while Israel has also seen to it that these negotiators that had opened up a direct channel to Hamas and said that they don't have horns growing out of their heads and that America is not an agent of Israel. He's gone. That guy's gone. And whoever is back is going to follow Israel down whatever delusion that they have. And their delusion is always the same. Their delusion is that they are the superior master race and they can impose whatever they want on everyone. That is not reality, and the collision between that racial will and reality is what we watch unfold. And unfortunately, the only way that it unfolds is in the form of war. So that is, I believe, the situation on March 15th, 2025. Like I said, I won't be counting anymore. I apologize for the long hiatus. Um, and I will not be back, like I said, as frequently, but I will probably resume reporting every once in a while. I'll also, I wanted to get back to writing. I want to write a briefing on the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is something that I do know a lot about and have a lot of the background on. And I might make a military video or two about that. I have been studying Sudan a little bit. I think I have some things to say about that um, I'm not seeing too many places. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about with other situations in the world, mainly those two. And I'll be continuing to report on this now that I believe we're back to war. Arguably, it never ended because the siege never ended, but there was a track. I think there was a future. I also think there was a branch of a future back in November 2023 where we could have gotten, 100,000 or more lives could have been saved, and we could have been in a much better world. But that was not up to anyone with a heart or a brain or a human soul. It was up to Zionists and racists and genociders whether this stops, and that decision still remains in their hands. So um, the rest of us still have to hang in there. And so I'll leave it at that. I'll keep this short tonight. And I'll see you guys in the next one.